a tribute to the Grateful Dead on Sunday, which was the 57th anniversary of their set at Woodstock in 1969. And we did it at Ripple Rays, and for some reason I ended up singing karaoke till like 1 a.m. afterwards, which was awesome. But this is my experience with that, growing up and learning about the Grateful Dead. I was 16 years old, a junior in high school, sitting in the front row of my AP US History class with Mr. Lancaster, a man the likes of 6'5", always dressed in khaki slacks and blue button-down, with a bolo tie and brown leather cowboy boots, size 11, and a ponytail and a long braid at least 3 feet long, about 3 or 4 inches past his waist. He had studied forestry at Virginia Tech, had a wife and a kid, and you could tell when they were away on vacation because he'd come in dressed exactly the same except for that braid, which was unbraided because of their absence. At least that's what he told us. He was a gentle but stern man and expected the best of all of us. It was sometime just before Thanksgiving, and on this day in class, our only assignment was to listen to Alice's Restaurant by Arlo Guthrie in its entirety, and then hold a discussion about it. You could tell he was in love with this type of story, and he loved sharing memories of his college days with us. Framed in black above his desk was an original Grateful Dead poster from one of the shows he had attended back in the 70s or 80s. It was one of his most prized possessions. I can't remember how often he talked of it or the number of times he'd seen them. Too many times to remember or count, I suppose. Or if we even really touched on the acid tests and Ken Kesey and his band of merry pranksters, their magic school bus further, F-U-T-H-U-R, as in you are going further into some microcosmic eternal space journey of the mind out into the world. Neil Cassidy, I don't think, ever came up in class, or how well he knew and befriended the Dead and Kesey. After all, he was the great eternal spirit of free 1950s America. You would find him, Cassidy, dancing like Shiva and flipping his tie-dyed sledgehammer into the wild abyss of the eternal night. It was sometime thereafter that I went to the record shop and picked up a copy of Skeletons from the Closet, the best of Grateful Dead, and listened to it nonstop, to and from school, on the bus rides to and from tennis matches, on my silver portable Sony Walkman DEJ011. It wasn't until college that I found my father's copy of Working Man's Dead upstairs in the back corner of the back room of my childhood home in a wooden crate with a whole bunch of other classic records from his 20s, him being born in 1950 and coming of age in the 70s. I fell in love with songs from Skeletons like Turn on Your Love Light, Sugar Magnolia, and St. Stephen, which might be my favorite early to come to song. Obviously, much later I found American Beauty and songs like Box of Rain and Operator, Eyes of the World, the album From the Mars Hotel, and a bunch of live recordings. These later albums got me through hard times in and after graduate school, and now often play quite loudly as I'm driving home on the interstate through the mountains toward the Shenandoah Valley where I grew up. In 2014, while in graduate school, I met a guy named Nick Maione, a tall Italian man, a musician, a painter, a poet, and Catholic, devout, who hosts an artist residency in upstate New York at a Benedictine monastery just outside of Elmira. In the summer of 22, I was blessed to attend the residency, and a few weeks before I left, I heard word from a friend, Brian Hassett, who I had met at the Beatnik Shindig in San Francisco back in 2015. How to describe Brian? A classic Deadhead, hitchhiked Kerouac's route to Boulder in the 80s, followed the Dead wherever he could. He called me up to tell me that Phil Lesh and friends were playing a show at an apple orchard in Lafayette, New York, and that if I could get a ticket, I should go. He and a bunch of the merry pranksters were going to be there. Fast forward to July 8th, 2022. When I got there, having driven 8 hours or so up from Virginia, I parked in a field overflowing with psychedelic color. Everyone smiled and waved and yelled, Phil Lesh. The energy and excitement was palpable. Once inside and making a stop at the merch tent for a poster, I made my way to the pocket of space behind the rail. And this is a true story about that. Someone offered me a bear sticker and a lollipop. I smoked a joint I had, snuck in, and looked for Brian. Slightly right, Phil's side, adjacent to another clearing of wobbling bodies, a man with silver hair and button-up tie-dye, Ryan, was hands gripped to rail, bobbing in internal circles. What he didn't tell me until I found him on the side in the clearing was that earlier on he had taken 3 tabs of acid. An hour passed and they hadn't just hit yet. So he took another 2 he had stashed in his shirt pocket. Those didn't hit either. So he told me. Apparently, another hour and later or so, he takes the last of the 7 he had brought. When I had found him, everything was circling in fractal vision. They had been holding off, and then all of them hit at the same time, all at once. I'd never really taken acid, so I can only guess as to what it might be like, but it was a delight to see the world going slowly in and out, the crowd dancing in harmony, singing their hearts out through the twilight. Halfway through the set, a lady approaches me in a highlighter glow chiffon dress with a bunch of glow sticks. She placed a clothespin on my shirt pocket, which read, "Yummy." She laughed and smiled and twirled around. She told me her prankster name, Patty Cakes, and asked me for mine, introducing me to her friend Mars, and we all congregated in the center, watching Brian circle his head back and forth to the bass drum solos of Phil Lesh and Friends. His son played lead, and at the end of the second set, we waited for the encore, a double encore, Eyes of the World, my newly favorite tune, and of course, Ripple. When the final reverberations finished echoing through the hillside, like a stone thrown in a wooden pond, Brian and I walked back to my car, still high and smiling. Another thing Brian hadn't told me was that I was his ride back to the place he was staying about an hour away in Oswego, near the Canadian border. I was, of course, obliged, and we headed that way, stopping at a gas station to fill up and get a case of LeBlanc Blue, the most refreshing, crisp taste after a bunch of sweet cider. And another thing you should probably know about Brian is that he only drinks Canadian beer. He brings it with him from Toronto, where he lives, every time he visits the States. I guess I should also mention that he spent almost 20 years living a block from Washington Square Park in New York City after studying at NYU. But that is a story for another time. We both cracked a Labatt and swapped stories and joints on our way to his friend's cabin on a bluff overlooking a small pond. We had both in our own ways been reawakened. I could not have imagined a more magical, hallucinatory evening spent with some of the pranksters and a bunch of elder deadheads. All night, like a band of woodland spirits from A Midsummer Night's Dream, we smoked joints and drank beer until the sunlight. I was now a merry prankster. Call me Puck, my prankster name, as it was given. Puck. Cool, thank you.